Welcome back to another Fatherhood Friday. Another week is wrapping up, and it's been a great week for me. I'm not sure where it's been for you. Weather's been kind of sketchy here in Wisconsin. It's been a lot of rain, a lot of clouds, but I've really enjoyed the time outside with the kids. When I get outside, the walks, the time, just enjoying the fresh air. I've been really getting present with the birds chirping in the morning. That's something that you don't often pause enough. Like sometimes when, without coronavirus, life's moving so fast. How many times do you honestly think and slow down and just listen to how awesome the birds chirping outside really is? And that's been something I know it's going to be a good day and a good feeling, and I have a good day without that, but I feel more connected to the morning when the birds are chirping outside. So I'm not sure where your week's been, but I hope it's ending on a great note, and I hope this episode helps connect you with who you are. I hope it opens your heart to who you could be as a father and really step into your best life. And so today's episode is going to be on the hidden story in Mary Poppins. So this is going to sound odd because I'm a Marine. I'm supposed to have this persona. I'm supposed to be this certain person. But I'm going to be in full disclosure. Mary Poppins is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love watching it with my kids. My kids love watching it. I love singing the songs with them. And in full disclosure, I'll sing with nobody else in the room because that's just who I am, and I love the songs, and I love how they made me feel. That's something that was always important, and I always liked just the message in Mary Poppins. But growing up, I never knew the real story of Mary Poppins, and I don't think a lot of people do either. And you get a taste of it with the second movie that Disney released called Saving Mr. Banks, which is the behind-the-scenes story of this woman's life about how this story of Mary Poppins came to fruition. Because it wasn't just this magical Disney movie, like most Disney movies are, where they just invent it out of nowhere. It was this idea of actually saving someone. And if you've seen Saving Mr. Banks, this is going to completely wreck it for you. So spoiler alert there for you. But in Saving Mr. Banks, there is a girl whose father dies at a young age of alcoholism. That he's coughing up blood, and this really impresses her that she just wants to save her dad. And she eventually grows up and becomes an author. And one of those books that she writes is Mary Poppins. And on the surface, Mary Poppins is just a great movie about laughter, about love, about being a kid, about being imaginative, doing the work when you don't want to, doing work that leads to fun. That's the kind of the basic message. But there is this hidden person in Mary Poppins, Mr. Banks. And at first, when you first watch Miss Mary Poppins, that idea of Mr. Banks, he's just a character. I would say that's how I always viewed it until I saw Saving Mr. Banks. I never saw this full idea of what Saving Mr. Banks really meant and what Mr. Banks represented in Mary Poppins. And to be honest, I cried when these first two movies kind of came together in my mind because I realized that pain and burden that Mr. Banks had in Mary Poppins is a lot like what a lot of dads have out there. How many dads out there right now listening to this walk in the door and just feel heavy, just like Mr. Banks? How many kids run up to them and they just want to push them away? They just want to go somewhere and sit down and relax. Like life was just a heavy day and it doesn't seem like it's filled with joy. It's filled with routine. Something else to highlight here with Mr. Banks, he had a very strong ego that told him that this was exactly how life was supposed to be. That his kids should behave a certain way. That he should behave a certain way. That all the others in the household should conform to the way that he was. But we all know that's not really how it's supposed to work. And no matter what your ego is telling you, no matter what subscription you're reading, that is how dad's supposed to show up in their kid's life, we all kind of know, when you watch that movie, you're like, oh yeah, that's just not how a dad's supposed to be, and you kind of start feeling sorry for him. And you don't realize what it really represents until you see Saving Mr. Banks, that movie represents that her father that she couldn't save, she wanted to create a book, and then Walt Disney wanted to create a movie. And when Walt Disney understood the actual story behind the story, he actually understood why the author was so protective of this movie, and she was very protective of this movie. And that's something they highlight in Saving Mr. Banks about getting the author to go on the journey with Walt Disney and being able to help tell that story to the world. And once they were able to tell it in a way they understood the whole fold of where her father was kind of the birthplace for this idea of Mary Poppins, they were able to bring something beautiful, which is what we now enjoy as Mary Poppins. But back to Mr. Banks, because Mr. Banks is that dad. He is the dad, whether that is taking place in 1910 or 2020. Mr. Banks exists out there. He might even be you. He might even be you, because when you come home, you feel a heaviness on your chest. You feel just overloaded. Like your shoulders are literally walking around with a 1 pound kind of weight around your shoulders. That is not what dads are supposed to feel like. That is not how being present as a dad is supposed to feel like. That is the opposite of what I've come to learn and love about being a dad. Coming home when I did have a job, that was so awesome for me, because no matter what kind of day I had, I would just embrace that love that kids can bring you. Because let's be honest, no matter whether you had a good day or a bad day, your kids enter your life in the exact same energetic way, that you are still their hero. You are still that person they look up to every day. And that was something that Mr. Banks didn't really honor. It was overwhelming for him in many ways, that like it made him uncomfortable, and he would use anger to try to get control back. How many of you guys have ever used anger to get control back of the household? Because it scares you inside in places that you don't talk about at dinner parties. That is not what fatherhood looks like. That is not what coming home and being present with your kids looks like. Because the side that you don't talk about is feelings, but the side that kids don't know any better is feelings as well. Those feelings are things that they are still learning how to do. My kids are 8, 5, and 3. Those emotions are about as wild as the Wild West. And to judge them, we can try to control them, or to look at them in a way that they are supposed to behave a certain way, and that you just need the right nanny in their life to conform. It's not about the right nanny, it's about the right amount of love. And that's what you see with Mary Poppins. She comes into their life and just brings presence. She gives them the gift of time. She gives them the gift of validation. She gives them the gift of feeling understood. The gift of just entering into their imagination. They literally jump into a sidewalk chalk painting and just live it in the moment. And that's one of my favorite things about being a dad, is when you step into their imagination, when you step into playing Legos, when you step into playing dolls, or when you step into, like with Sophia, my oldest, when you step into something that she wants to do. That is something that's so powerful. Recently, we've been starting to play chess during coronavirus, and she's absolutely loved it. And so that is something she probably has 2 times a day to play chess. And that's our thing now. Whatever it is, enter their world, because when you enter their world, that's really where they feel the most connected, and that's where you're really going to feel the most present. But circling back to the hidden story in Mary Poppins. So if you think of Mr. Banks as this person that is kind of just in this repeat mode of life, he goes through, he wakes up, he rinses and repeat. He goes to a job that he thinks he needs to have. He goes to a place where he thinks he needs the validation. He goes to a place of work that he steps into a world that he just doesn't feel right, but he puts on this suit. He puts on the flower. All of that is part of this outer facade to be who he thinks he needs to be someone that doesn't projects that he has it all together. And if you think of it as towards the end of the movie, when he falls down and he gets fired and all of that comes down and he's in the bottomless pit, there's a moment where he remembers Mary Poppins' phrase of, when you really don't know what else to say, the best thing that you can say is supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And he instantly starts rising up again. And he instantly starts recognizing the inner child inside. And all those gifts in that scene where it's at night, they're in the boardroom, and he just starts laughing uncontrollably. At that moment, he's receiving the gifts in his heart that he wasn't able to receive before. He's receiving the gift of joy and laughter that his kids were trying to bring to him, but he was rejecting. His heart was closed right up until that scene. And at the end, they go into he goes in the basement, they start he makes the kite, they go outside, they start flying the kite. All of that is kind of like the triumphant end. And so when you think of Mary Poppins, the movie, I want you to think and really look at yourself. Are you Mr. Banks? Do you need a Mary Poppins in your life? Because everybody kind of needs a Mary Poppins in their life, whether it be a friend that you maybe need to find in your life. Maybe it's your wife. She's been saying this stuff, but you haven't been acknowledging it. Everyone has that mirror to reflect back what they can't see. And that's what Mary Poppins did. She reflected back kind of those hard truths to him. And in what he says is the mind games of her setting him up. All of those happened, but that was really just her reflecting back what he couldn't see. And then once he fully seen it, he stepped into the laughter. He stepped into the joy of being a father. He physically came home at the end of Mary Poppins. And that is the story of so many dads, veterans and non-veterans, and active duty and non-active duty. It doesn't matter. If you wear the title of fatherhood, I am positive, if you were like me, I was also Mr. Banks at one point, where everything was caught up on work. Everything was about the career. Everything was about, I just need to achieve and conquer that one more mountain outside my family before I could feel pride, before I could feel love. And then that's the part that no one really talks about, is you don't need any of that. It's all required and it's all good and it has its own purpose. But the core of where you need to start is at your family. And that's what Mr. Banks learns at the end of the movie. He learns that his kids, his wife, the home, everything was already there that he was looking for. And the crazy part is by stepping into his role as a father, he ends up getting his job at the bank. The grandfather passes away and his son steps in and says, hey, we want you to come back to the bank because you made dad laugh. And that's something that you just don't honestly pause and slow down and listen to enough, because there are a lot of examples just like that, where you think you have to act a certain way to get ahead. But then when you pull back and you step into your heart and you let that rise out, amazing things come towards you. Have you ever heard the movie The Secret or the Law of Reciprocity? All of that kind of happens when you step in and give your best self. And what Mr. Banks wasn't doing is he wasn't honoring his best self. He had his ego on. He was protecting himself from the hard truths that he didn't want to acknowledge as a father, and his role as a father. Your role as a father is not the leave it to beaver model. Well, you go to work, you come home, you read the paper, and your kids play. Your role as a father is to be present, to provide, to connect with your kids, and to give them the comfort and the freedom to be themselves. And if you've seen Mary Poppins or Mr. Banks or Saving Mr. Banks, you know that hidden story of saving dad is something that Mary Poppins has as a hidden truth. And it wasn't until this movie that it really hit me that this whole entire movie of Mary Poppins was never about the kids. It was never about the fun and the joys of the movie itself. It was always a story about saving Mr. Banks. And in 2020, so many dads out there, a few of you probably even listening, are very relatable to Mr. Banks. That what I'm saying and what you're hearing is probably a lot like what you show up in every day. That you go to a work, you go to a job, you identify that this isn't how life is supposed to be, but you don't understand how to change it. And the best gift that you can get from Mary Poppins is understanding your family is the key to unlock that happiness. Your family isn't something that you should avoid. Your family is something you should embrace. And the idea of family and connection, and there's a reason why at the bottom of our logo we have our family as our legacy, because the key to moving forward in our life, the key to feeling that joy, the key to unlocking our heart and releasing that outer joy into our family stands within us, and our family is the best chance we have to leave a legacy. And so if you want to help save Mr. Banks, start with yourself. Start with identifying how you can step into your heart and how can you step into your family, because the movie Mary Poppins outlines it beautifully. It's probably the message that nobody paid attention to, but it was a message that everybody needed to hear. And I hope this video and I hope this message today helps you understand that Mary Poppins isn't just about songs and sugar and spoonful of sugar and a bunch of funny things that she says. It is about stepping into your best self. It is about owning the role that you play as a father. And it is about stepping into that best life that you get to have when you wear the title of dad. And every day you're going to fall down as a dad. Every day you're going to try to figure out what the right next step is. But that's the beauty of father. That's the beauty of kids, because they will forgive you. And every day we're all figuring it out. And no matter what people tell you, everybody's figuring out. Even me, I fall down regularly. But the most important part is to be humble, stand up, lead your family, be connected, and be a great dad. So guys, I'm signing off, and I will talk to you again on Monday.